Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Almost 500 wildfires are burning across the province, and they are taking a toll on BC's firefighters. It is challenging and courageous work, and it's changing. We're going to hear what it's like at the front lines, and we're asking you, have you ever thought of becoming a firefighter? What's drawing you to it? Have you or a loved one worked or volunteered to join those crews? And what's needed to support BC's firefighters? After 12:30, finances and feminism. How can women save and grow their wealth amid rising costs and unequal system? I'm Michelle Eliot. This is BC Today. It has been a challenging and tragic year for firefighters in Canada. 3 have died, including 1 in BC. And over the weekend, hundreds of people gathered to honor Devyn Gale. The 19-year-old died on July 13th while fighting a wildfire near Revelstoke. Last Saturday, a memorial procession and service was held for her in that city. Hundreds of residents lined the streets, and family, friends, and fellow firefighters tearfully paid tribute. Here's some of what they had to say.
My name is Casey Robinson, and I'm the Initial Attack Crew Supervisor of the Columbia Zone. And I'm honored to be here to share some of my experiences with Devyn. I first met Devyn in her junior season. Every year we train a group of local grade 12 students, and once the school year is done, they'd come and join us for fire season. I was one of the people who trained and interviewed the juniors that year, and when I met Devyn, she struck me as being thoughtfully reserved with a drive and a desire to learn. With fire, I tell everyone who joins us, you get out of it what you put into it. And Devyn really took this to heart. Devyn started in 2021, which you may remember was a very big fire season. And crews were having a hard time putting out fires, yet somehow Devyn's crew, the Southeast 450 crew, they seemed to be putting out at least 1 fire a day, if not more. They were doing an amazing job with under really difficult conditions. After that season, her confidence and her comfort with the team grew. It's an intimidating feeling coming into a new fire base. It's a group of people who are a special kind of crazy. Whether it's singing songs or playing jokes on each other or going out and patrolling in the pouring rain, it's a group of people who are the epitome of the statement, hard work builds character. And Devyn fit right in. I'm so proud to say that you were part of Columbia Initial Attack. Thank you for being an amazing person. We love you, and we'll miss you.
Casey Robinson is with the BC Wildfire Service and worked with Devyn Gale. The 19-year-old died earlier this month while fighting a wildfire near Revelstoke.
There's a lot of pressure on them. It's a high risk, high stress environment. People spend a lot of time away from home, away from their family and supports that they normally have. They generally don't get enough sleep, don't get enough, of sort of proper nutrition. So yeah, there's certainly a cumulative stress impact there on our firefighters, as well as on the support staff that help sort of keep the machine running.
That was the voice of Steve Lemon, whom we spoke to on Friday's program. Now, he's a safety and well-being officer for the BC Wildfire Service and an incident commander as well. He says that early start to the wildfire season means many firefighters have already been away from their families for 10 weeks, and it has had a big impact on their personal well-being. And that is what we're talking about today. What is it like for those firefighters on the front lines? If that's something that you have considered yourself, we'd like to hear from you. If you have volunteered or worked as a firefighter yourself, especially during the summer, during wildfire season, let us know what it is like and what would help to support BC's firefighters. And we are taking a look at the people across the province and in your community as well who do fight fires. We want to hear from you if you're in one of those communities that has been affected and that has been impacted by the firefighter service. Love to hear from you as well. Give us a call, 1-800-825-5555. 950-604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And welcome to you as well if you are watching us streaming live on YouTube on the CBC Vancouver page, on CBC Gem, and on our website, cbc.ca/BC is where you can find us online. I have two guests joining me for this conversation. Ken McMullen is the president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs and chief of emergency services in Red Deer, Alberta. We're also joined by Brendan Mercer. He is decision support manager for BC's First Nations Emergency Services Society, and they both join me now. Hello, good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. We have been hearing just how challenging this season has been for firefighters, with tragic outcomes as well, of course, and hearing what happened with 3 firefighters and Devyn Gale here in BC. Brendan, what goes through your mind just thinking about what is in front of the crews right now?
Well, certainly it would be a challenging season, and my heart goes out to Devyn Gale and her family. I mean, that would be very, very challenging to have to go through that in the midst of everything else going on.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who was a former firefighter for BC Wildfire, I know the camaraderie and what Casey Robinson spoke about. I know how important that is to build relationships with the firefighters coming up so that you have resources and support in the future. So just going out to all the firefighters this year, be careful, be safe out there. As Steve Lemon pointed out, and he's a very knowledgeable IC. I've had the pleasure of him training me before to become a crew leader for firefighting, but it's a very high risk, very high stress environment. So I'd really reiterate what Steve was saying and just take time for yourself, be smart, be cautious. If you need a break, take a break. The fires are going to be burning this year. They'll be burning again next year. But what we can do is try to do the best we can in response, but really going forward to shift the emphasis on preparedness and mitigation so that we don't have to be in these situations where we're putting people in dangerous and in harm's way just to put out some of these wildfires. So for all the firefighters out there in the interim, I would recommend being safe and watching, being very careful because it's going to be a challenging season. We're only halfway through the summer, and with climate change, things look a lot worse around the corner.
Yeah, it is prolonged as well, isn't it? And Ken, as the head of the Association of Fire Chiefs, watching BC season, and of course Alberta has been so affected as well. What stands out to you about this season?
Yeah, if I may, just for one quick minute, just let me begin by expressing our solidarity with the families, friends, communities of all 3 of the very tragic incidents that we faced here, British Columbia, Northwest Territories, as well as my home province here in Alberta.
Yes.
And I'm thrilled to have to be on here with Brendan and our very good colleagues within the First Nations Emergency Services Society of BC. Thanks for being here, Brendan. Thanks for the work that you folks do. You're an extremely important members of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, and we look forward to working together in the future. To your question, and I'm probably echoing what's been said, the men and women are exhausted. They have been working around the clock. In Alberta, the first fire started April 28th, and they've been at it ever since. And so when we hear this term unprecedented, and it's a term we all got very used to hearing during the pandemic, the fact of the matter is that is the term that best describes our fire season right now. As you likely know, last week we passed a unfortunate milestone in our fire season, whereby as we have now had 100,000 square kilometers, which is 10 million hectares, have burnt across Canada, and we have not seen that before. So there's a lot going on, and the fire just seems to be spreading from one community as being the highest risk to another community. And unfortunately, it is that risk in British Columbia right now that is on the forefront of everybody at the mine.
Yeah. We have firefighters from out of the country coming in to help, 100 from Brazil over the weekend. What would be their role, Brendan? I've heard from Cliff Chapman at the BC Wildfire Service that a lot of that is to be able to give reprieve to BC's wildfires and enable them to have those breaks. What would be the role for out of country or out of province firefighters coming to help in BC?
Well, there could be quite a few different roles, but in my experience from working on the fire line, as in the unit crew, is we'd get out there and start tackling fires once they started happening, once they started getting a little bit crazy. So we'd be in there. I'd be a danger tree faller, trying to make all the sites safe for the crews and that. Once these sites become a little bit safer, the fire behavior calms down a little bit. And these are thanks to the great IA initial attack crews and unit crews out there in BC. But once the fire behavior calms down a little bit, there's guards and hose lays in place. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done on a fire, like going in with the hoses, suppressing it out, what they call putting a black line around the fire, just increasing the resiliency of some of the guards. So the crews that come in from out of country, like Brazil crews, sometimes Albertan crews, South African crews, could be
Right.
any number of countries, will end up doing a lot of what they call mop up and demobilization, which is very critical to the unit crews and IA crews out there because they're responding to these incidences as they keep popping up.
Right.
But
So they can
somebody's got
move
to
on.
oversee.
Okay. And then they clean up.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they clean up afterwards so that those other unit crews don't have to go back and do that work. They can continue going on and doing the initial sort of fire work, and then have these crews take care of the long-term work. Because sometimes these mop-up, depending on the fire, could still take a full month to get a fire to a stage where you're comfortable calling it out or contained. So there's still a
Right.
lot of work, and that's why we need to have these folks come in to take some of that workload off our current unit crews and initial attack crews' shoulders, as well as all the other great fire departments that are out helping out as well.
Quarter past the hour here, 17 minutes past the hour here on BC Today. You're catching us on CBC Radio 188.1 FM in Metro Vancouver and live streaming as well on cbc.ca/BC, on our website and on CBC Gem and on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page. Thanks so much for joining us. My guests right now are Brendan Mercer, who is the Decision Support Manager for the First Nations Emergency Services Society of BC, and Ken McMullen is President of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs and Chief of Emergency Services in Red Deer, Alberta. Very good to have them with me this afternoon. As we ask you, have you ever volunteered or worked as a firefighter, and have you considered becoming one? And what's drawing you to it? How has the job changed? And so what kinds of supports are needed, do you think? Even if you're a member of a community that has been affected by wildfire and you've seen the kind of job that firefighters do and the difference that they make in staving off or reducing or eliminating wildfires, let us know how that has affected you and your community. Love to hear from you. 1-800-825 5950 604 669 3733 star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also send us an email, and that's bctoday@cbc.ca. And I love to get to what that is like. Brendan, you've told us a little bit about, what your job was like with the BC Wildfire Service. Personally, you've talked about the need to spend time for yourself, to take those breaks if needed. What was it like for you personally to do this job?
Well, it can be quite exhausting, to
I
be
bet.
honest, because for a lot of students out there, and I imagine Devyn and Gale included, we're going to school as well in the fall. So you're going hardcore all fall and winter to go to school. Then you get this job and the opportunity in the summer. So you want to make the most of it, get as many hours as you can, work as hard as you can, make friends. But in that process, you end up working sometimes 14 days on wildfires in a row with only 2-3 days off, sometimes in between. And those days, depending on your activities, like I was a danger tree faller, so carrying around a chainsaw and gas all day, it can be quite exhausting. So just making sure that you're getting the proper amount of sleep each night, which again can be difficult because you're working sometimes on fires for 16, 18. I mean, I've personally been on fires for 24 hours straight.
Oh my
So sometimes
goodness.
it is difficult. So you really have to find those moments, find safe zones, take a break, take it down a notch, because if you're just going full bore all the time, you will burn yourself out. Absolutely. Sometimes firefighting, we think of it as a race to get out there and put the fire out. But like I was saying before, bringing these crews from Brazil and stuff, these fires can last months and take months and months to effectively suppress. And we need good people working for that entire time span. If we have people burning themselves out really quickly, it doesn't work that well for the longevity of some of these operations. So in my experience, just over the years, trying to see where I could take gaps and learn on the front line, like, okay, this is a good opportunity. I got to sit down, get some water, find some shade. But I definitely recommend people talking to your bosses, talking to your supervisors, making sure that there's good safe zones set up, good adequate water supplies on some of the lines. if it keeps getting hotter and keeps getting more intense out there, there's going to be a huge demand on firefighters, potentially right through all of August and into September,
Oh my
which then
goodness.
it's several more weeks of this high intensity 14, 16-hour day working in some of these environments. So because it's such a high stress, high intensity environment, yeah, taking that time to just relax is so, so critical. Can't stress it enough.
What kept you going, Brendan?
The passion of the job, to be honest. There's when you're out there, you know you're helping communities, you're helping people, suppressing these wildfires. Um, Sometimes you have wildfires really far away from the middle of nowhere, but they're still impacting sensitive sites, cultural areas. Sometimes you have fires right near the community, and then it's easy to see firsthand what type of impacts that you have from preventing homes and things from burning down. So just I guess the need to want to give back to communities and to people and kind of and help out in that regard has sort of always driven me for the long term. But going back to something you mentioned earlier, some of the things that have changed over time, that's exactly what I've seen firsthand firefighting. Is when I started off there, we had some fires that were pretty intense for sure, but my last fire season in 2014, or my last big fire in 2014, was up in Tumbler Ridge, where we had to run away to save our own lives every day. And those type of situations put so much more stress on people. So from looking at that, it's like, how can I still help with fire? How can I still help people, but do it in a little bit of different way, which led me to work at First Nations Emergency Services, helping get preparedness funding and mitigation funding for communities so that we don't have to respond in the future. We're doing more preparedness and mitigation activities so that we can alleviate a lot of the response and recovery, because recovery from some of these disasters is by far the worst aspect of them.
Wow. Brendan Mercer is with me from the First Nations Emergency Services Society of BC. We're also joined by Ken McMullen, who's the president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, and also is in Red Deer, who's the chief of emergency services there. We are asking you if you have worked or volunteered as a firefighter yourself. We would love to hear your story. What is it like on the front lines, and what keeps you going? If you have considered it yourself, what draws you to it, and what do you think are the supports needed for firefighters in BC? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. Let's take a call from Rob, who's joining us from Vernon. I understand you're a firefighter yourself, Rob?
Yeah, I was a firefighter for 30 years in the city.
In the city, so urban fires.
Yes, but we've had a cattle ranch area up in the Chilcotin area of BC where we've had to help fight many forest fires up there.
Over the course of your 30 years. And so in the interior, I imagine you had some busy summers doing that. What was that like for you?
Well, in the city that I worked in, it was in Vancouver, so we didn't have very many fires there, even though we were called to the Kelowna and Kamloops area over the years to help fight the fires there. But in the pursuit of the forest fires, I know it's a completely exhausting and very traumatic experience to be front lines day after day after day, night after night. It's just two totally different types of fighting fires, but both very, very equally rewarding.
Absolutely. You see, we heard from Brendan the difference that you are making. You talked about how traumatic it was. As far as you're comfortable, what was the most difficult part?
Well, the training helps you with a lot of the comfort zone, because there's certain times when you're fighting both types of fires, you're questioning your life choices to put yourself in those areas. But the training that you receive, the camaraderie of working with your fellow men and women on the front lines and stuff like that is tremendous. It's huge. It keeps you going. With the unfortunate incidents that we've had this year, you really can't help but just feel for the families. I'm sure the people were equally as trained all over the province. But it's the camaraderie, it's the teamwork, leaning on each other to do the job that really keeps you pushing and keeps you going throughout the day.
Oh, that's a lovely point. And I'm sure you're faced with danger, so to be able to have that is crucial in that moment. Rob, anything else you want to share with us?
No, just like I said, just to the people on the front lines that are actually still fighting these fires. I wish I could do more for them. But just give them all the support we can, give them all the training they need, the equipment they need, the manpower they need, and hopefully people will continue to do this job. I do fear for, in the future, people starting to stay away from any type of firefighting career, but I highly recommend it. Enjoyed every day I went to work, thoroughly enjoyed it.
The camaraderie, and as you said, the difference that you're making in terms of it being rewarding.
Yeah, it's huge. You go home at the end of the day, and if you've had a fire that day, or like in the city, but you go home at the end of the day with a huge source of this is what I did today, and I was glad I was there to help out when I could.
Yeah. Rob, well, thank you very much for being there to help out. Really appreciate hearing from you. You're in the South Okanagan now in Vernon. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
That's Rob joining us from Vernon. I want to pick up on his point there on training, Ken McMullen. How important is that? He says that's what made the difference. As you're faced with these challenges, you're sort of questioning, how did I get here? But it's the training that kicks in. How crucial is that? And how sufficient is it at this point, given how much change we're seeing when it comes to the nature of wildfires?
Yeah, thanks for the question and great points. Rob, congrats and well done career that you certainly had in your province of BC and the difference that you make. Rob made a couple of points there, and he said they're very different when we're talking about wildland firefighting versus municipal or structural firefighting. And yet there's so much safety that's intertwined between two when we talk about identifying risks, mitigating those risks. They're both in either of those components of wildland or structural. Up until 2013, the federal government had a funding opportunity in Canada called the JEP funding, Joint Emergency Preparedness Plan, that allowed fire departments to apply for specialty training and equipment. And the reason I bring that up is because the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs continued to advocate for the federal government to re-implement that program. So it ended in 2013, and fire departments around this country utilized that for what we're calling specialty training and equipment. And I'll end that by saying that wildland firefighting, although it is something that we're becoming far more involved in these days than we have traditionally in the urban fire service, when we talk about specialty training and specialty equipment, we would put wildland into that category as not the typical structural training that we receive. So that's how important it is. I can't understate that.
Okay, there is, what is so specialized about it?
Well, they're very different. The environment different. The risk is different. We heard Brendan talk about the danger trees.
Yes.
Structural firefighters, we look at all sorts of fall hazards, but we're not trained in falling of trees. And the risk that has become extremely evident in the last couple of weeks. So we have to take specialized courses. We have to look to our colleagues in wildfire to be the experts in those areas. And really our expertise, the vehicles that we use, the equipment that we bring from a structural perspective are not designed to go off-road. We carry big, heavy trucks that are designed to be on asphalt, not into gravel roads or off into the areas. So there's quite a significant difference.
Let's take a call once again. Also in Vernon, of course, the interior would be, this would be of interest for you, for our audience there. Roxanne is joining us now. Hi there, Roxanne. Hi, Roxanne. Are you there?
Hello?
Hi. Hi, Roxanne. Thanks so much for calling in.
Yeah, well, I'm in Vernon now, but when my three sons worked in the Ministry of Forest, that was at a Prince Road.
It was, pardon me, where?
And, they got in the program through the initial attack program.
Okay. And Roxanne, I'm having trouble hearing you. Could you...
fighting fires.
You have three sons who went to fight fires with the Ministry of Forests. Hi, Roxanne. Can you hear me?
Hello?
It sounds like we might be having some trouble with our connection with Roxanne. Let me try once again, because I sure would love to hear your story. It sounds like you have three sons who...
Sorry, are you there?
Hi, Roxanne.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes, I can.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. And you have three sons who worked as firefighters?
Yeah, and my big concern, I guess, this is the point that I wanted to raise. I don't, obviously, I heard stories of the years that they fought, but my biggest concern now that they're in their 30s is the exposure that they had to all that smoke and what that might mean in the long term for their health.
Yeah. As a mother, I can certainly understand that concern. Thank you so much for your call. I'm glad we were able to have you on. You take care.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Ken and Brendan, but perhaps I'll go to you, Brendan, on that quickly. Just, the long-term concerns after being out there and exposed. We've heard so much about wildfire smoke and the impact it can have on people's health. I'm sure for firefighters, it's an even more serious concern.
Yeah, it is a pretty serious concern, but I would be lying to you if I said it. It seems like sometimes the public is more aware of the concerns around smoke than even firefighters on the line. And I say this just because I worked for BC Wildfire for years, doing prescribed burns, doing wildfire suppression, all these other types of events over the years. And as a result, inhaled a ton of smoke chemicals over the years. Haven't noticed anything personally wrong with myself, but it is definitely something that doesn't really get discussed as much as it should. And quite honestly, it is a huge concern. We see it in fire departments where they have SCBA apparatuses and all other types of oxygen to go into burning buildings. When you're on the fire line, sometimes it's 40 degrees Celsius and you just can't carry around an oxygen tank, a mask. Like, it just logically doesn't make sense. So it is kind of a gray area where there's not a lot of guidance in that realm, I should say. Unfortunately, I've personally seen people inhale so much smoke they've been vomiting on the fire line before, and it's pretty awful. Unfortunately, there's just not really a good mechanism in place right now. I have seen, I guess, some promising notes from looking at smoking studies that over the course of a decade of not having that same level of exposure, you can almost go back to being almost where you were beforehand. So I am hopeful that once your sons are out of that exposure now in their 30s, that they might have been away long enough that their lungs will start to sort of regenerate themselves naturally. Otherwise, I don't have a better answer, and I'm sorry.
Well, let me just quickly go. We are going to go to the news update in just a moment here, but Ken, is there any work being done on that right now?
There's a great deal of work getting done, so thank you. And again, our thanks and support to you and your family that are out there risking their lives to protect ours and the environment and property. Two things that I'll very quickly mention, and I know we're running out of time. First of all, look at the province of Alberta. In the last year, they have changed their WCB legislation in and around exactly the Fort McMurray wildfires of 2016. They have changed the latency period, which meant the amount of time required in order to be compensation for firefighter-related cancers. Equally as important, and probably a much broader scale that will benefit all provinces, recently in the federal government, Bill C-224 was just passed by Senate. Bill C-224 is the creation of a national framework to recognize all cancers across Canada. Right now, different cancers are recognized differently in each province, as well as numbers, gender, etc. So do your research on the upcoming framework on firefighter-related cancers. We are all doing our best through that training, education to reduce the risks. The fact of the matter is it's an inherently dangerous profession that we are all part of, and we need to do more to ensure that those that get sick are supported the best they possibly can.
Really informative and heartrending to hear from both of you just the kind of challenge that is in front of firefighters and what drives them to it. Thank you so much for both of you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks to you, Brendan, to you and your organization as well.
Yeah, thanks to you as well.
That's Ken McMullen, president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs and chief of emergency services in Red Deer, Alberta. And Brendan Mercer is decision support manager for the First Nations Emergency Services Society of BC. It is 12:35, 1:35 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, live streaming as well on cbc.ca/BC and on your CBC Gem app on YouTube as well at CBC Vancouver. I'm Michelle Eliot. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. And coming up, we are going to talk about finances and feminism and how women can save up and grow their wealth amid rising costs and an unequal system. That's coming up after this CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
7 News. 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 7 Good afternoon. An evacuation order near Kamloops has been expanded to cover more than 340 properties because of the threat posed by an aggressive wildfire. The Ross Moore Lake fire doubled in size over the weekend to about 18 square kilometers. Meanwhile, contractors working on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion in the area are helping firefighters battle the blaze. Police in Port Moody say a 14-year-old boy is in critical condition in hospital after an incident Saturday afternoon at Sassamat Lake. First responders were called after a report of a possible drowning. Authorities say bystanders and park staff pulled the team from the water and performed CPR. And the provincial government has committed $10 million a year in new funding for services for sexual assault survivors. The money will fund 68 programs across the province. The government is also moving ahead with its pledge to improve police standards aimed at making criminal investigations more effective and reduce officer bias. And now the forecast. Air quality statements continue for many areas of the province due to wildfire smoke. On the north coast, cloudy this afternoon with a high of 15. Highs reaching 19 with some smoke, sunshine, and a chance of thunderstorms in the Peace. In the central interior, cloudy with a high of 22. Highs reaching 33 with sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 29. And here on the south coast, heavy rain in some areas this afternoon with highs around 18. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Certainly welcome to have some of that rain. Absolutely.
It is a nice change of pace, isn't it?
Yeah, and
Yes.
hopefully it makes a difference with the wildfire season. Rob, thank you so much.
You bet.
That's Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on Women Make, how much they can spend on necessities like food and housing, and how much they can save for their futures. Now, 2018 Statistics Canada numbers show women in BC made 18.6% less to do the same job as men. And earlier this year, the BC government introduced legislation that would require employers to include wage or salary ranges on all publicly advertised jobs. And that's a move the province says is a step toward pay equity. Now, one author is tackling what's needed to change the system, but also what women can do about their own finances. Janine Rogan is a certified public accountant and the founder and CEO of the Wealth Building Academy. Her new book is called The Pink Tax: Dismantling a System Designed to Keep Women Broke. She's taking your calls today about personal finance and how it impacts women. You can let us know what are your questions and your strategies to manage your finances amid rising cost of living. And how have you been affected by the gender wage gap? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can use your cell phone as well. That's star or pound 690. And you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, for our callers, we do have a copy of the book to give away to one caller who joins us on the program. So there you go. There's motivation for you to give us a call and share your thoughts, your questions, and your experiences as well. And Janine Rogan joins me now from Calgary. Hello, good afternoon to you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's very nice to meet you and speak with you. Can you tell us a bit more about your personal story and what made you interested in finance and feminism?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, and I guess throughout my younger days as a small child, I was always interested in money. One of the first stories I tell in the book was about a lemonade stand that I ended up getting two other children in the community to help me with. And I think that interest in money continued as I did my accounting degree, as well as my CPA designation. And, you know, as I was doing my CPA designation and finding that I was, you know, filing tax returns for some of the biggest companies in Canada, I was auditing some of the biggest companies in Canada, but no one was teaching us about how to build our own wealth and how to invest and grow our wealth sustainably for the future. So that is really initially what got me interested in personal finance. And then over the past probably 3 or 4 years, I've really dived into what it means for women and personal finance. I think so often women were being told and continue to be told that, you know, the reason we don't have money is because we bought too many lattes or our shoes are too expensive or avocado toast.
Avocado toast, yeah.
Yeah, can't have a house. And I just felt like that wasn't actually the case. And so that's really what led me down the path of doing a ton of research into this topic and what financial systems we have set up that impact women's bank accounts.
And what did you find? How are women, as you say, being affected by that system designed to keep women broke?
They are impacted in a number of different ways. And this is, what is so crucial and important to understanding this issue is that it is so multifaceted. It's not just one thing. It really starts to perpetuate from as early as there is actually an allowance gap between young boys and young girls, all the way up to not having conversations with your financial advisor or not being involved in those conversations. And then, that perpetuating into women not negotiating and not talking about money and being comfortable with that, all the way through to things like the pink tax, where women just pay more for those items that men or pay more for those items than men do. So we really see it perpetuated throughout our society. And that's ultimately what leads to that wealth gap of women holding only 30% of the worldwide wealth.
And when you talk about the pink tax, perhaps let's remind people, what that actually applies to, what the products are that this term, the pink tax, apply to.
Yeah, so it was originally coined in the 70s to understand the difference between men's and women's products that are basically the same. One is usually a pink color, and if you walk into any grocery store or any Shoppers Drug Mart, you'll see a difference in price between those two. Razors is a really good one to look at. And if you don't see a price difference between men's and women's products, you'll usually see that the volume for the women's products is a lot smaller than what it would be for the men's. So like 500 milliliters versus 450, and they're the same price. So that is what the original term, the pink tax, was coined to explain. But really in the book, we take it a lot further in terms of all of the systems and all of the challenges that women face when they're trying to build wealth.
Yeah, we've heard that term, right, applied to so many different stores, beyond Shoppers Drug Mart, all, I know you mentioned it, but a lot of different kinds of stores. Of course, the pink tax, that term, and it is part of the title of a new book called The Pink Tax, Dismantling a System Designed to Keep Women Broke. Janine Rogan is a CPA and author of the book, and we are taking your calls as well, asking you, how are you managing amid the rising cost of living? What are your own questions and your own strategies for saving up for your future and paying for those necessities, and perhaps trying to increase your own, your own personal income? Love to hear from you. And how are you affected as well by that system? Perhaps by the pink tax or by the gender wage gap. Love to hear from you on the open line. We have a copy of the book to give away as well to a caller. It's 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. And Janine, we'll talk about changes needed, systemically in a moment, but what are some personal strategies that women can employ then?
Yeah, absolutely. Two really big ones are investing and negotiation. So I think it is so important that women are involved in investing and building their wealth. We often see that women tend to keep their money in cash more often than their male counterparts. And this leads to them not being able to build wealth in the same way as people who are investing in the stock market. I just actually pulled the data on Friday. The S&P 500 is up 18% this year. So if you're not investing, you're missing out on those gains. And that really is how we start to close the wealth gap. Because if we're just on our own to save all of that money for our retirement, we're never going to be able to get there with the way wages are. And of course, how expensive things are when it comes to inflation. So number one, I would say absolutely investing is so important to financial independence and building your wealth. And the second would be negotiation. We know that women don't negotiate as often as men do. And this is a variety of or it's multifaceted as to the reasons why this is the case. Maybe not being confident enough, being told that they hold certain stereotypes if they are asking for what they actually want. But what we see is for every $5,000 you don't negotiate at the beginning of your career, you are potentially missing out on up to $750,000 in earning potential, because we know that once you get a raise, once you're at a certain level, when you get that next raise or that next promotion, that's going to be based on the original wage that you had. So it is so important to negotiate everything, not just your salary, but absolutely everything in life, whether it's your cell phone bill, a car you're buying, whether if you're in a store, you can always ask if there's a potential discount. I think that there are so many ways people can negotiate that are low stakes, as opposed to your first one being that scary salary negotiation. Right. But I think, practicing that every single day can ultimately lead to you retiring earlier.
Yeah, really interesting. We'd love to hear from our callers as well. You can let us know. Do you have questions about those two things, about investing, about negotiating for perhaps, a cheaper cell phone bill? Have you done it yourself? Maybe you can share strategies with us. Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. And do you agree with that? That does exist, those gender stereotypes when it comes to how women are affected by our system? We'd love to hear your thoughts. How have you been affected by that difference in the gender wage gap as well? Our number is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And perhaps what I'll do is I'll ask you more questions about those two things. And how can someone, start investing? People may be thinking about, sustainability, or what are the considerations people can take then if they're thinking of taking that step toward investing?
Absolutely. And I think that's, taking the first step is the hardest one because it can seem really overwhelming. And our financial industry as it stands today has a lot of financial jargon baked into it. And that can feel really overwhelming for people when it comes to getting started. And I think understanding that you are a beginner in this and that it is going to take a little bit of time is something that you can do to give yourself a little bit of grace when it comes to how overwhelmed people can feel with their money, because this is something we're not taught in school. But if you're getting started, I would say that your TFSA for Canadians, that's the tax-free savings account, is your number one wealth building account that you can open, and then making sure that you're investing in a well-diversified portfolio within that specific account, the TFSA. There are lots of books and YouTube videos out there around how to get started investing. Myself, I know probably some other content creators also have online courses that do teach people how to start to understand how to build a proper investment portfolio. And then I guess you really have to understand what is important to you. What are your values? Is it sustainability? Is it, there are ETFs these days that really focus on gender equality. So investing in companies that have a proper amount of women in their C-suite or on their board, you really have the ability to kind of pick and choose what's important to you within your investment portfolio. And that is hopefully in alignment with your values.
Okay, think about your values as well. What are you hearing from your clients? How are they affected by, everything is going up, right? We know about housing, rent, interest rates as well. How are women and millennial and Gen Z women being affected right now?
Yeah, I really do think people are having a challenging time with the cost of things. Year over year, mortgage interest rates have gone up by 30%. So I think we are really going to see some challenges as people start to renew those mortgages. I know people are extremely stressed about being able to afford food and rental prices going up. And that, ultimately is being driven by those increase in mortgage rates. So I think, especially because we're in these challenging inflationary times, there are a couple of things that you can look to do. And one of those is, trying to find a way to either make more income or get a raise at your current job or switch roles. Because if we are seeing these astronomical increase in prices and we don't see an increase in wages, you're ultimately losing purchasing power. So now is a really good time to start thinking about different ways that you can make money, and is there a way to have multiple streams of income coming into your bank account as a Canadian?
And housing affects especially younger people, being able to get into the housing market and everything like that. How are specifically millennial and Gen Z women, what are the differences or disadvantages that they may have for their generations?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Depending obviously on what city you live in, there can be bidding wars. I know that's starting to happen in Calgary. I'm sure that's happened in Vancouver forever.
Yes.
But we're starting to see that in Calgary, which is a little bit different than what we're used to. So, being prepared to pay more than asking for a home, which ultimately is going to mean having a bigger down payment, ultimately meaning you're going to need to save more up beforehand, or ultimately having that larger mortgage payment means that you're not able to afford as many other things in your life. In addition to this, we do see that women typically have less access to credit, which usually means that and I guess that would probably come from the fact that they have lower incomes. So when we look at this systemic way that women have managed their finances, they have less access to credit, which usually means their credit score is lower, which will ultimately potentially drive the mortgage rate that they get. So we're seeing potentially a higher mortgage rate for women than their male counterparts, just simply because of the way the system is set up. So there's a lot of factors going into how this is actually impacting millennial and Gen Z women, from, pricing of houses increasing to larger down payments to even higher interest rates than what our male counterparts are seeing.
Now, governments seem to be trying to tackle the systemic issues that you've been raising when it comes to pay equity. I mentioned what the BC government is doing in terms of disclosure of that salary range for publicly advertised jobs. And the federal government has tackled childcare, for example. What are the things that need to change? How far are these announcements going?
Yeah, there's still a lot of work to do. If we look at the childcare, we've seen an initial rollout, but we're definitely not where we need to be. Childcare is still costing parents between $500 and $1,000 a month, which is in a lot of cases a car payment or half of a mortgage payment. And some of these families can't even access childcare because they're in a childcare desert. So there's definitely more work to do there. From the wage equality and the transparency, that's a great first step. I definitely encourage companies to, continue to report on that. We've seen in a lot of the big tech companies that have tried to address this, they actually need to go back every 6 months and reevaluate to make sure that there's no pay gap, because that's how quickly it can happen. And there are biases in our hiring practices that are also there. So I would love to see policy around, annual reporting from a public company perspective, or even a private company perspective, showing that, wage gap or lack thereof, hopefully, every single year, and companies having to be held accountable to that.
Let's take a call from Kirsten in Vanderhoof. Hi, Kirsten. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing?
I am fine. And what do you think of this topic? How has it affected you?
It was interesting, and I had an interesting observation. I work as a tattoo artist, and I just ran down from my greenhouse, so I'm out of breath. I didn't think there was a wage gap in this industry, because we're pretty much on equal footing, or so I thought. It was really interesting that I just recently took on a male artist in the shop, and it was interesting how the clients treated him as compared to me. So, and even though, and it's worth noting to say that the quality of his work wasn't quite as good as mine, but they had no problem, paying what he was asking, and he had no problem asking full price, top dollar for it. But I not often, most of my clients are absolutely fantastic. But every now and then I get people who want to negotiate and who kind of give me the side eye, like, oh, no, you're too expensive and I don't want to pay that. So I find that it's almost an outside imposed wage gap.
You've observed it yourself, and it's affected you. Have you tried then perhaps negotiating, and what's that gone? How has that gone?
Well, typically, I usually give my clients good deals anyway, just because, and I think that's a lot of, my problem. I'll look at my work and, oh yeah, it took too long, so I'll knock the price down or whatever. And I'm not really expensive. I try to keep the cost down. My overhead is reasonably low, so I don't have to price myself really high. So, I try to keep that in mind. But as far as I don't have a lot of margin to negotiate with. The costs have gone up significantly since COVID started. So, my margins, my profit margins are almost nil. Like when it comes right down to it, I'm the one person now again in my studio. I work for maybe $11, $12 an hour when I factor in all the time I spend doing advertising and accounting and, all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's, I'm not getting rich when people say, well, you're $160 an hour. Well, yeah, I don't take that home.
Right.
There's
You've
a
got
lot of
costs.
stuff that comes out of that.
Kirsten, thank you so much for the call in Vanderhoof. I'm going to very quickly, I only have about 30 seconds, but Linda and Gibsons, you wanted to share some advice.
I did. Hello. Thank you for taking my call. First of all, I'm a grandmother. I've got 3 grown children. So, I've got a lot of experience. I've lost money to sleazy stockbrokers in the Vancouver Stock Exchange way back, and it's turned me off forever. But hey, we're in a new era. I think there's women out there, obviously, as your speaker says, that will help you. And so as grandparents, I was going to suggest that if you can help your millennials with even $1,000 to start investing, please, because, man, they need help. We all need help right now.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, thank you for taking my call.
Thank you very much. We obviously don't have stockbrokers to respond to that, but the advice to help your grandparents, really good to hear from you as well. And I am right out of time here, but Janine Rogan, thank you so much. Obviously, it resonates with our callers there. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Janine Rogan's new book is The Pink Tax, Dismantling a System Designed to Keep Women Broke. Congratulations to Kirsten and Vanderhoof. You get a copy. That's it for us today. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you so much for listening and watching to BC Today. Have a great afternoon.